Caffeine. You wake up, pour a cup of dark liquid, and think you're drinking energy. You aren't. Caffeine doesn't give you a single drop of actual energy. Throughout the day, your brain produces a chemical called adenosine. It builds up, fitting into specific receptors like a key in a lock, telling your nervous system that you are tired and it is time to sleep. Caffeine is an imposter. It is exactly the right shape to jam itself into those locks, blocking the adenosine from getting in. You aren't awake, your brain is just temporarily blind to its own exhaustion. You are putting a piece of black tape over the check engine light and pressing the gas pedal to the floor. And your brain adapts. It realizes the locks are jammed, so it literally grows more adenosine receptors. That's why 1 cup used to make you vibrate, and now you need 3 just to feel normal. Nicotine. You step outside for a smoke or a hit from your vape, take a deep breath and feel the stress melt away. You think nicotine cures your anxiety. That is the greatest biochemical con job in human history. Nicotine is a stimulant. It literally raises your heart rate and blood pressure. It does not calm you down. What it actually does is trigger a massive, unnatural spike in dopamine, which plummets within 45 minutes, creating a micro-withdrawal. That withdrawal manifests as physical tension, irritability, and stress. When you take the next hit, you relieve the withdrawal. Nicotine creates the panic, then sells you the cure, taking credit for solving the exact problem it caused. It is a biological protection racket living in your lungs.
Alcohol. You think alcohol lowers your inhibitions and reveals your true self, liquid courage. It doesn't. Alcohol is a sledgehammer to your central nervous system. It works by enhancing GABA, the chemical that slows your brain down, and blocking glutamate, the chemical that speeds it up. But it doesn't shut down the whole brain at once. It specifically targets the prefrontal cortex first, the adult in the room, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, social anxiety, and consequence weighing gets unplugged. You aren't finding your true, authentic self on the dance floor. You are just operating on the hardware of a toddler. Drink more, and it hits the cerebellum, destroying your balance. Drink even more, and it hits the hippocampus, stopping your brain from recording memories. That's a blackout. You didn't forget what happened, your brain literally stopped hitting the record button. And the hangover? That's not just dehydration. That is your brain, which flooded itself with stimulant chemicals to keep your heart beating while you poisoned it with depressants, suddenly waking up with the brakes removed. That's why you wake up at 4 a.m. with a pounding heart and crushing anxiety. It's called hangxiety. It's the chemical bill coming due. Benzodiazepines, Xanax, Valium. You pop a pill to kill a panic attack or fall asleep. You think you are relaxing your mind. You aren't. You are chemically smothering your brain's alarm system. Benzos work exactly like alcohol, aggressively amplifying GABA to shut down the nervous system. But they do it with terrifying surgical precision. They don't just calm you down, they induce a state of artificial apathy. You could watch your house burn down on Xanax and not care. But because the brain demands balance, it stops producing its own calming chemicals. If you take them long enough and stop suddenly, the brain's alarm system turns back on at maximum volume. The withdrawal from benzos is one of the only drug withdrawals on Earth that can literally kill you through grand mal seizures. You bought temporary peace of mind on a credit card with an infinite interest rate. Cannabis. People love to say weed is completely harmless because it's just a plant. They say it expands their mind, cures their pain, and makes music sound better. Here's the mechanics. THC floods your endocannabinoid system, the network responsible for regulating memory, appetite, temperature, and mood. It completely overloads the receptors that tell you what is and isn't important. Suddenly, a mediocre bag of chips and a terrible TV show feel like profound, peak human experiences. You get paranoid because it occasionally overstimulates the amygdala, your fear center. The danger of modern, high-potency cannabis isn't that it kills you. The danger is that it makes you perfectly content with being bored. It provides unearned satisfaction, and if you are constantly content with sitting on a couch doing nothing, you stop growing. You blink, and 10 years have passed in a haze of comfortable mediocrity. Adderall and amphetamines. You think it's the limitless pill. You pop one to study for a test or finish a massive project, and suddenly you are an unstoppable machine of focus. You aren't suddenly a genius. Amphetamines trigger a massive release of dopamine and norepinephrine, the chemicals associated with the fight-or-flight response. You have chemically induced a state of total panic and aimed it directly at a spreadsheet. Your brain thinks you are running from a saber-toothed tiger, but instead of sprinting, you are color-coding an Excel document for 9 hours without blinking or eating. It turns you into a hyper-efficient robot, but it strips away your creative lateral thinking. You can execute flawlessly, but you lose the biological ability to step back and ask if what you're executing even matters. Cocaine. You see it in the movies. The Wall Street broker doing a line in a bathroom stall and suddenly conquering the world. Cocaine makes you feel like a god. Here's why. Normally, your brain releases dopamine to reward you for doing something evolutionarily good, eating a massive meal, having sex, achieving a hard goal, and then it reabsorbs it. Cocaine blocks the reabsorption. The dopamine floods the synaptic gap and gets trapped there, bouncing around, screaming at your brain that you are the most successful, brilliant, powerful apex predator to ever walk the earth. But you didn't earn it. You didn't build anything. You just snorted a chemical, and the half-life is brutally short. When the drug wears off, the dopamine vault is entirely empty, leaving you in a state of crushing, paranoid, irritable deficit. You are borrowing tomorrow's happiness to pay for tonight's arrogance.
Methamphetamine. If cocaine is blocking the drain so the sink overflows, meth is kicking the bathroom door down, smashing the pipes, and setting the house on fire. Methamphetamine doesn't just block the reabsorption of dopamine, it forces the brain to dump its entire reserve all at once, at levels thousands of times higher than you could ever achieve naturally. It destroys the receptors in the process. It is highly neurotoxic. People stay awake for 4, 5, 6 days straight. The brain, deprived of sleep and drowning in stimulant chemicals, begins to literally hallucinate. The shadow people meth users see aren't magic. They're the result of a brain entering waking psychosis because the visual cortex is collapsing from exhaustion. Meth burns out the pleasure centers so completely that users physically lose the capacity to feel joy from anything else in life, sometimes permanently. MDMA, ecstasy, or Molly. You take a pill at a festival. The bass drops, and suddenly you love everyone. The lights are beautiful, the stranger sweating next to you is your soulmate, and the universe is pure empathy. You think you've tapped into a higher frequency of human connection. You haven't. MDMA acts like a chemical sponge, wringing out your brain's entire supply of serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine in a few hours. Oxytocin is the chemical mothers release when bonding with a newborn child. You are artificially forcing your brain to chemically bond with a random guy in a neon tank top. It's forced, unearned empathy. It's beautiful in the moment, but the connection is a chemical illusion. Suicide Tuesday arrives, the serotonin bank is entirely bankrupt, and the world turns into a gray, hopeless, depressing void until your brain can slowly manufacture more serotonin over the next week. Ketamine. You snort a line at a party and suddenly you feel like you are floating outside your own body. You think you are achieving astral projection. You aren't. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It works by blocking NMDA receptors, essentially cutting the communication wires between your conscious mind and your physical body. It was invented for battlefield surgery because it doesn't slow down your breathing. It just disconnects the pilot from the cockpit. At high doses, you enter the K-hole. You can't move, you can't speak, and you feel like you are dissolving into the geometry of the universe. It isn't spiritual enlightenment, it is a chemically induced sensory deprivation tank. Your brain, receiving absolutely zero input from the outside world, starts hallucinating its own reality just to keep itself occupied. Classical psychedelics. LSD and psilocybin. You take a tab of acid or eat a handful of dried mushrooms, and suddenly the walls are breathing. You see the truth of the universe. You think you are communicating with plant spirits or traveling to a higher dimension. You aren't leaving your brain, you're just turning off the user interface. Psychedelics suppress the default mode network, the part of your brain that acts as the conductor, maintaining your ego, your boundaries, and your sense of self. Without the firewall, different regions of your brain that usually never communicate start talking to each other. The visual cortex crosswires with the auditory cortex, which is why you see sounds and hear colors. You feel one with the universe because the neural boundary defining where you end and the universe begins has been temporarily deleted. It's not magic, it's just your brain running its raw, unfiltered code without the protective software that keeps you functional in society. DMT, the spirit molecule, the nuclear option of psychedelics.
You smoke it, and within 15 seconds, you are blasted out of a cannon into a kaleidoscopic hyperspace. Users consistently report encountering entities, machine elves, or gods who communicate with them. It lasts exactly 15 minutes, but it feels like 1,000 years. You think you visited the afterlife. In reality, DMT binds so aggressively and perfectly to the serotonin 2A receptors that it overclocks the visual and emotional centers of the brain to absolute maximum capacity. Because it is metabolized so incredibly fast, the brain experiences a violent near-death level shock to its sensory processing. The entities you see aren't aliens. They are the fragmented, personified architecture of your own subconscious mind projected on the inside of your skull in 8K resolution. Opioids, heroin, fentanyl, oxycodone. The absolute bottom of the trap, the final boss of biological hacking. You think it just stops physical pain. It does, but it does something much darker. Opioids bind perfectly to the brain's endorphin and dopamine receptors. Endorphins are what your body naturally uses to reward you for survival, for eating when starving, reproducing, and surviving trauma. Opioids hack this exact system, but 1,000 times stronger. It feels like the ultimate warm blanket. It feels like returning to the womb. It replaces the feeling of being loved. But by hijacking the absolute deepest core survival circuitry, the drug rewrites your biological hierarchy of needs. It tells the primitive lizard part of your brain that this white powder is more important than food, more important than water, more important than your children, and eventually more important than breathing. That is how opioids kill you. They don't poison your organs, they suppress the central nervous system so perfectly, so comfortably, that your brain simply forgets to tell your lungs to take the next breath. It is the only drug that doesn't just alter your reality, it completely replaces your will to live.